Marcus Chun sat at the wrong table and let a paralyzed billionaire believe he was the specialist who could save her silent daughter, and now the lie had grown too massive to confess. When Victoria Hartwell gripped his arm and begged him not to leave, he realized walking away would shatter the only hope she'd felt in 8 months, but staying might destroy them all. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Chun had exactly $12 in his wallet, and he was sitting at the wrong table. He didn't know it yet, of course. All he knew was that the restaurant his sister had chosen for this supposedly casual blind date was so far out of his league that the leather menu didn't even have prices listed. It was never a good sign. The kind of place where they called appetizers small plates and water came in bottles with Italian names he couldn't pronounce. He'd walked past 3 valets just to get through the front door, each one looking at his 10-year-old Honda Civic like it was a personal insult to their establishment. His sister Emma had been relentless about this. "You need to get back out there, Marcus. It's been 2 years. You can't spend the rest of your life just being Danny's dad. You're allowed to be a person too." She'd set the whole thing up through a friend of a friend, someone named Jessica who worked in marketing and loved hiking and had a great sense of humor. Emma had shown him exactly one photo, a smiling blonde woman at what looked like a company picnic, and he'd agreed mostly to get his sister to stop texting him 17 times a day. Now he sat in this cathedral of wealth and white tablecloths, tugging at the collar of his only dress shirt, the same navy button-down he'd worn to parent-teacher conferences and his father's funeral. He tried to iron it that morning while Danny ate cereal and asked why Daddy looked so nervous. "Because I'm meeting a new friend," he'd said, which was technically true even if it felt like a lie. Danny had grinned with a milk mustache and said she was going to like him because he was the best dad in the world. The vote of confidence from a 7-year-old had almost been enough to make him cancel, but here he was, 5 minutes early, sitting at table 17 as instructed, watching the door and trying not to calculate how much the bottle of sparkling water on the table was going to cost him. A waiter had already been by twice, hovering with the kind of patient contempt that suggested Marcus didn't belong here. He'd ordered the water to have something to do with his hands. That was $4 he'd never see again. The restaurant was the kind of place where conversations were conducted in murmur, where the gentle clink of crystal and silver created a symphony of refined wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, the skyline glittering like a promise just out of reach. Marcus felt like he was sitting in someone else's life, trying on clothes that didn't fit. He checked his phone again. No messages from Emma, no updates. Jessica was now officially 3 minutes late. It wasn't late at all, except when you were drowning in anxiety and trying not to look at the menu. He glanced around the restaurant, taking in the other diners. A couple in their 50s celebrating something, champagne glasses catching the light. A group of businessmen in sharp suits laughing at jokes that probably weren't funny but were expensive. And then near the far corner he saw movement that made his breath catch. A woman in a wheelchair was being seated at a table across the room. Even from this distance, Marcus could see she was striking. Dark hair swept back in an elegant twist, a dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent, and an expression of cool composure that suggested she was very used to rooms like this. 2 men who looked like security flanked her table before retreating to a discreet distance. She glanced at her phone, then at her watch, a gesture of someone used to people being on time. Marcus looked away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring. He took another sip of his criminally expensive water and wondered if Jessica would be the kind of person who ordered wine. Probably. He'd have to nurse one glass through the entire meal and hope she didn't notice he was terrified of the bill. The $12 in his wallet felt like a cruel joke. He had another 40 on his debit card, maybe 50 if he was lucky, and the electric bill hadn't cleared yet. This date had disaster written all over it, and it hadn't even started. The woman at the other table was looking at the door now too. He noticed that same expectant tension he felt mirrored in her posture. He wondered what her story was. Someone like that, in a place like this, probably had a very different set of problems than worrying about whether you could afford the valet tip. She looked like old money, or at least comfortable money, the kind that came with security details and tables always available. He was so focused on not staring that he almost missed when the hostess appeared beside his table. "Mr. Chun," the hostess said, her voice quiet but carrying a note of urgency. "I apologize for the confusion, but there's been a slight mix-up with the reservations." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Of course there was. Of course this night, already balanced on a knife's edge of anxiety, was going to get worse. He started to stand, already apologizing, already planning his retreat to the parking lot in his sad little car. But the hostess wasn't asking him to leave. She was looking past him toward the woman in the wheelchair, and her expression was strained with professional panic. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust me. The woman at table 9, she's one of our most valued guests. There was a mistake with the table numbers, and she was supposed to be seated where you are." Marcus blinked, processing. "You want me to move?" he said, already reaching for his jacket. "No," the hostess said quickly, quietly, her eyes darting between him and the woman. "Her date hasn't arrived yet. Neither has yours. What I need is for you to go sit with her for just a moment while we sort this out. Just introduce yourself, make small talk for 2 minutes, and then we'll have everything correct. It's just that she can't be seen sitting." She's very particular about that. There are photographers sometimes. Marcus stared at her, certain he'd misunderstood. "You want me to pretend to be her date?" Just for a moment the hostess insisted, and there was genuine desperation in her voice now. "Please. My manager will have my job if she complains about the confusion. Just 2 minutes. I'll come get you the second your actual table is ready." She'll never even know the difference. It was insane. It was the kind of thing that would absolutely spiral into a catastrophe. Marcus could feel it in his bones. The way this night was already cursed, already doomed to be a story he'd tell with shame for years. But the hostess was looking at him with pleading eyes, and somewhere deep in his chromosomes was the evolutionary inability to say no when someone asked for help. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? 2 minutes of awkward small talk with a stranger, then he'd retreat to his proper table and try to salvage whatever was left of his dignity. Okay, he heard himself say, the word coming out before his brain could stop it. The hostess's face flooded with relief. Thank you, she breathed. Just act natural. You're dining together. She's M's. Victoria Hartwell. Be polite. She'd probably ignore you anyway. Victoria Hartwell. Even the name sounded like it came with a trust fund and a family crest. Marcus stood on shaking legs, smoothing down his cheap shirt, and began the long walk across the restaurant to the wrong table. He was vaguely aware of his heart hammering against his ribs, of the fact that this was absolutely going to end in disaster, but his feet kept moving anyway. As he approached, Victoria Hartwell looked up from her phone, and Marcus got his first clear look at her face. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe mid-30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers. But there was something else there too, a wariness, a careful control that suggested she was very used to being watched and judged. Their eyes met, and for a fraction of a second, he saw surprise flicker across her features before her expression smoothed back into cool politeness. She thought he was her date. The hostess hadn't warned her either. Marcus realized with dawning horror that he was now trapped in a lie he hadn't even agreed to tell. He opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, to run, but before he could say anything, Victoria Hartwell smiled. It was a small, professional smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes but transformed her face into something almost warm. You're late, she said, her voice smooth and cultured. I was beginning to think you weren't coming. And just like that, Marcus Chun sat down at the wrong table with a woman who thought he was someone else entirely, and his life changed forever. Marcus should have corrected her immediately. He should have explained the mix-up, apologized for the confusion, and retreated back to his proper table before this misunderstanding became something worse. Those were the thoughts racing through his mind as he lowered himself into the chair across from Victoria Hartwell, his hands gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. But the words stuck in his throat because she was looking at him with such direct, assessing intensity that his brain simply short-circuited. I apologize, he managed, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Traffic was terrible. It was a weak excuse, the kind of generic lie that people told when they had nothing better, but it bought him a few seconds to think, to plan his escape. Except Victoria was already gesturing to the waiter who materialized beside their table with the silent efficiency of a well-trained ghost. We'll start with the 2015 Chateau Margaux, she said without looking at the wine list, and bring us the tasting menu. All courses. Her eyes returned to Marcus, a slight challenge in them. Unless you have dietary restrictions I should know about. Marcus barely heard the question. His mind was still processing the words tasting menu with the kind of terror usually reserved for natural disasters. He had no idea what that cost, but he knew with absolute certainty it was more than the $40 on his debit card. No restrictions, he said faintly, and the waiter glided away. Victoria leaned back slightly in her wheelchair, her posture perfect despite the casual elegance of the movement. She had the kind of presence that suggested she was used to commanding rooms, making decisions, being obeyed without question. Everything about her, from the understated diamond earrings to the way she held her wine glass, spoke of a life Marcus couldn't even imagine. So, she said, her tone conversational but with an edge of something he couldn't quite identify. Maxwell spoke very highly of you, said you were the perfect candidate for what I need. Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Maxwell. He had no idea who Maxwell was. He had no idea what she needed. He was absolutely catastrophically in over his head, and the window for confession was slamming shut with every passing second. He's very kind, Marcus said, the words automatic, meaningless. Quote, he was buying time, trying to figure out how to extract himself from this nightmare without causing a scene, but even as he thought it, he knew he was trapped. The hostess had begged him for 2 minutes. But those 2 minutes had evaporated the moment Victoria ordered wine that probably cost more than his car. If he stood up now and admitted the truth, he'd humiliate her. He'd expose the restaurant's incompetence. He'd make himself look like either an idiot or a con artist. Victoria was studying him with an expression that made him deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't attraction or interest. It was evaluation, the kind of look you gave a potential business investment or a resume that needed vetting. Tell me about your background, she said, taking a delicate sip of water. Maxwell was sparse on details. Said you preferred to let your work speak for itself. Marcus's mind raced. His work. What work? He was a single father who spent his days managing a small logistics company, coordinating shipping routes and dealing with customs paperwork. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the kind of career that got you into restaurants like this. Before he could formulate an answer that wouldn't immediately expose him as a fraud, Victoria continued. I need someone discreet, she said, her voice dropping slightly. Someone who understands that what I'm asking requires a very particular kind of patience and professionalism. My situation is unique, as I'm sure Maxwell explained. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His situation was rapidly spiraling from uncomfortable to potentially dangerous. What if this woman was involved in something illegal? What if Maxwell, whoever he was, had set up some kind of business deal that Marcus was now accidentally impersonating someone? The wine arrived, a ceremony of presentation and approval that Marcus watched with mounting dread. The waiter poured a small amount into Victoria's glass. She swirled it, inhaled, tasted, and nodded. The waiter filled both their glasses, the dark red liquid catching the candlelight like liquid rubies. Marcus picked up his glass with a hand that he hoped wasn't visibly shaking. The wine probably cost more per sip than his entire dinner budget for the week. Victoria raised her glass slightly. "To new beginnings," she said, and there was something in her voice, a vulnerability hidden beneath the polish that made Marcus's chest tighten with guilt. He was deceiving this woman. He was sitting here under false pretenses, letting her believe he was someone he wasn't, someone who could help her with whatever unique situation she was in. "To new beginnings," he echoed and took a sip. The wine was extraordinary, smooth and complex in ways he didn't have the vocabulary to describe. It tasted like money, like a world he'd never be part of, and it sat in his stomach like lead. "I should be upfront with you," Victoria said, setting her glass down with precise care. "I don't do this often. Hire people for personal matters. My staff handles most things, but this requires someone outside my usual circles. Someone without preconceived notions about who I am or what I need." Marcus forced himself to nod, to look engaged, while internally he was screaming. Every word she spoke was another brick in the wall of deception he was building, another lie he'd have to eventually confess to. The first course arrived, something delicate and artistic on a white plate that looked more like a painting than food. Victoria picked up her fork with practiced ease, but Marcus noticed the slight tremor in her hand, quickly controlled. She was nervous too, he realized. Whatever this meeting was about, it mattered to her. A lot. "Tell me about your son," she said suddenly, and Marcus's head snapped up, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Victoria was watching him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "Maxwell mentioned you were a single father, that your situation was similar to mine in some ways." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Maxwell had set her up with someone, another single parent maybe, someone who would understand whatever challenges she was facing, and Marcus had accidentally stepped into that person's shoes. "Danny," he said, the name coming out before he could stop it, because that was the one true thing he could offer in this swamp of deception. "He's 7. He's everything." Victoria's expression softened, the first genuine emotion he'd seen break through her careful composure. "I have a daughter," she said quietly. "Sophia. She's 5, and she's the reason I'm here." Marcus should have stopped her, should have confessed right then that he wasn't who she thought he was, that this was all a terrible mistake. But something in her voice, the raw honesty of it, the pain barely concealed, made him stay silent. She needed to talk to someone, and for whatever cosmic reason, he'd stumbled into being that person. "Sophia doesn't speak," Victoria continued, her fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. "Hasn't for 8 months. The doctors call it selective mutism triggered by trauma. My ex-husband, he left in a particularly cruel way, and she saw things she shouldn't have seen, heard things she shouldn't have heard, and now she's locked inside herself and I can't reach her." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He thought of Danny, of what it would be like to lose his son's voice, his laughter, the constant stream of questions and observations that filled their small apartment. The thought was unbearable. "I'm so sorry," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "That must be terrifying." "It is," Victoria admitted, and for just a moment the powerful, composed woman across from him disappeared, replaced by a frightened mother. "I've tried everything. Specialists, therapists, programs that cost more than most people make in a year. Nothing works." She looked at him directly and he saw the desperation there. "That's why I need someone like you. Maxwell said you had a gift for reaching children who others had given up on, that you specialized in trauma cases." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The real person she was supposed to meet wasn't just another single parent. He was a specialist, a child psychologist or therapist. Someone with actual qualifications and experience. Someone who could genuinely help this woman's daughter. And Marcus was a logistics manager who read bedtime stories and helped with homework. He had no training, no expertise, nothing that could possibly help a traumatized 5-year-old girl. The waiter appeared with the second course, buying Marcus a few precious seconds. His mind was racing through his options, all of them terrible. If he confessed now, after she'd opened up to him, trusted him with her daughter's story, he'd humiliate her. She'd shared something deeply personal with a complete stranger under false pretenses. The betrayal would be crushing, but if he didn't confess, if he let this continue, he was actively deceiving a desperate mother. He was giving her false hope. He was, in essence, lying to someone who was drowning and reaching for a lifeline. "I need to tell you something," Marcus started, his voice tight. Victoria looked up, waiting, her expression open in a way he suspected it rarely was. But before he could continue, before he could shatter whatever fragile trust had formed between them, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again, a rapid succession that meant emergency. "Excuse me," he said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. The screen was lit up with messages from Emma, each one more frantic than the last. Danny had an accident at his friend's house. Nothing serious, but he was asking for his dad. Marcus needed to leave now. He looked up at Victoria, at this woman who'd just poured her heart out to a stranger, and felt the weight of his deception crash over him like a wave. "I have to go," he said, standing abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh in the refined quiet. "I'm sorry, it's my son." Victoria's expression shifted immediately, concern replacing everything else. "Of course," she said. "Go. Is he all right?" "He will be," Marcus said, already backing away from the table. "I just need to be there." He took 3 steps before his conscience, that stubborn, inconvenient thing, made him stop. He turned back to Ms. Hartwell. "I'm not who you think I am. This was all a mistake. I'm so sorry." He didn't wait for her response. He couldn't bear to see the realization dawn on her face. The trust turned to anger and hurt. He just fled through the restaurant, past the concerned hostess, past the valets, into the night air that felt like forgiveness. He'd escaped. He'd gotten out before the deception became something worse. But as he drove toward his son, his hands gripping the steering wheel, all he could think about was the look in Victoria's eyes when she'd talked about her daughter, the desperate hope, the fear, and the fact that he'd just crushed both. Danny was fine. A scraped knee, a bruised ego, and tears that dried the moment Marcus pulled him into a hug. His son had been running in his friend's backyard, tripped over a garden hose, and convinced himself he was dying based on the dramatic amount of blood from what turned out to be the smallest cut imaginable. Marcus sat on the edge of the bathtub in his friend's bathroom, carefully cleaning the wound with antiseptic while Danny sniffled and explained in exhaustive detail exactly how the accident had happened. "You're being very brave," Marcus said, applying a band-aid with practiced efficiency. Danny's bottom lip trembled. "I tried to be brave, but it hurts so much, Daddy." "I know, buddy, but you're okay now. See? All better." He kissed his son's forehead, breathing in the smell of little boy sweat and grass stains, and felt the familiar rush of gratitude that Danny was safe, whole, his. This was what mattered. This small, precious life that depended on him for everything. But even as he drove them home, Danny chattering beside him about whether the scar would make him look tough, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of Victoria Hartwell's face. The way her expression had shifted from confusion to understanding in the split second before he'd fled. He'd seen it, even though he'd tried not to. The realization that she'd been deceived, that she'd opened her heart to someone who wasn't real. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone. He'd lied to a desperate mother. He'd let her believe, even for 20 minutes, that help was sitting across from her, that someone understood, that her daughter might have a chance. And then he'd ripped it away with a coward's confession and run before he had to face the consequences. It was the right thing to do, he told himself as he helped Danny into pajamas. It was the only thing to do. Continuing the deception would have been infinitely worse, but it didn't feel right. It felt like he'd kicked someone who was already on the ground. That night, after Danny finally fell asleep clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur, Marcus sat in his small living room with his laptop open. He told himself he was just curious, that he just wanted to understand who Victoria Hartwell actually was, what kind of world he'd accidentally stumbled into. It took exactly 3 seconds of searching to find her. Victoria Hartwell was everywhere online. The CEO of Hartwell Industries, a tech company worth billions that her grandfather had founded, and she'd transformed into a global powerhouse. She'd taken over after a car accident 5 years ago, had left her paralyzed from the waist down, and killed her father. She'd been 28. There were dozens of articles about her remarkable recovery, her triumphant return to the company, her ruthless business acumen. She was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. She'd been interviewed by every major publication. She'd given TED Talks about resilience and innovation. They were also buried deeper in the search results tabloid articles about her divorce. Her ex-husband, an artist named Julian, had been caught in a very public affair with a model. The split had been nasty, played out in gossip columns and social media. There was one particularly cruel article that featured photos of Julian and his new girlfriend at some glamorous event, with a sidebar noting that Victoria had not been seen in public since the separation. The implication was clear. She was broken, damaged goods, and he'd moved on to someone better. Marcus closed the laptop feeling sick. This woman had lost so much. Her mobility, her father, her marriage, and now her daughter's voice. And he'd added himself to that list of losses. Another person who'd disappointed her, another false hope that had crumbled. He picked up his phone half a dozen times that night, trying to compose a message, an apology, an explanation, something that would make it better. But what could he possibly say? "Sorry I let you pour your heart out to a complete stranger. Sorry I'm not actually qualified to help your daughter. Sorry I'm just a guy who manages shipping containers and has no business." And every version sounded inadequate, so he sent nothing. Victoria Hartwell sat in the back of her town car, watching the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Her driver, Thomas, knew better than to make conversation when she had that particular expression on her face, the one that meant she was processing, calculating, deciding how to feel about something before she allowed herself to feel it. The dinner sat on the restaurant's bill, already paid by her assistant, who'd been called to handle the situation. $700 for a meal she'd barely touched, for a conversation with a man who'd vanished like smoke, leaving only a cryptic apology and a growing sense of humiliation in his wake. She should have been furious. She was Victoria Hartwell. People didn't deceive her. They didn't waste her time. They certainly didn't run out on her mid-conversation after she'd shared the most painful, private details of her life. She had every right to be angry, to feel used, to add this to the growing list of reasons why trusting anyone was a mistake. But she wasn't angry. She was confused. Because in the 20 minutes she'd spent with Marcus Chun, or whatever his real name was, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in months. She'd felt heard. He'd looked at her when she talked about Sophia, not with pity or professional detachment, but with genuine empathy. Like he understood what it meant to be terrified for your child. Like he knew what it was like to feel helpless. And then he'd run, but not before saying he wasn't who she thought he. Not before apologizing. Which meant whatever deception had occurred, it hadn't been malicious. It had been a mistake. The question was what kind of mistake and why. Victoria pulled out her phone and called Maxwell. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and professional. Victoria, how did it go? Did Dr. Richardson seem like a good fit? Dr. Richardson, Victoria repeated slowly. Describe him to me. Maxwell paused, clearly confused by the question. Tall, probably 6'2", early 50s, gray hair, glasses, very distinguished looking. The literature on his work with selective mutism is really quite remarkable. Victoria closed her eyes. The man she'd had dinner with was maybe 5'10", mid-30s, with dark hair and no glasses. Nothing about him was distinguished. He'd looked uncomfortable in his own skin, like he was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Like he didn't belong, which she now understood he didn't. Maxwell, she said carefully, Dr. Richardson never showed up, did he? There was a long silence. I don't understand, Maxwell finally said. He confirmed the reservation this morning. He should have been there. He wasn't. Victoria said. Someone else was. She hung up before Maxwell could ask more questions. She didn't have answers yet, but she was going to find them. The restaurant was high-end enough to have security cameras. It took Victoria exactly one phone call to the manager, who fell over himself apologizing for the mix-up she hadn't even explained yet, and promised to pull the footage. Within an hour, her assistant had delivered a flash drive to her apartment. Victoria sat in her home office, Sophia asleep down the hall, and watched the footage from the restaurant's entrance. There, a man walking in, looking nervous, checking his phone. He spoke to the hostess, who consulted her tablet and pointed him toward the dining room. He walked with the careful gait of someone trying not to draw attention to himself. And then minutes later, the same hostess approached him at a different table. They had a brief, intense conversation. The man's body language was reluctant, but he stood. He walked toward Victoria's table, and their accidental evening began. Victoria rewound the footage, paused it on the clearest frame of the man's face. She didn't know who he was, but she knew how to find out. She had resources most people couldn't imagine. Within 24 hours, she'd have a name, an address, a complete background check. She could make him answer for wasting her time, for deceiving her, for making her feel something that turned out to be based on a lie. Her cursor hovered over the send button of the email to her head of security. One click and she'd have everything, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of the way he'd looked when she'd mentioned Sophia's silence, the way his face had crumpled with genuine sorrow, or maybe it was his final words before he'd fled. I'm not who you think I am. This was all a mistake. I'm so sorry. He tried to tell her the truth. He tried to stop the deception even when it would have been easier to just disappear. That had to mean something. Victoria deleted the email draft. She'd find him eventually. Her curiosity wouldn't let her drop this. But maybe, just maybe, she'd given the chance to explain on his own terms first. After all, she'd spent years being underestimated, dismissed, written off as a tragic figure in a wheelchair. She knew what it was like when people looked at you and saw only what you'd lost, not what you still had to offer. This Marcus Chun, whoever he really was, had looked at her and seen a mother. Not a CEO, not a victim, not a scandal, just a mother who loved her daughter. In a world where everyone wanted something from Victoria Hartwell, that had been a gift, even if it was wrapped in a lie. She closed her laptop and wheeled herself down the hall to Sophia's room. Her daughter was curled under her princess blankets, her breathing soft and even. Victoria watched her sleep, this beautiful, broken little girl who carried so much pain in such a small body. Somewhere out there was a man who'd accidentally given her mother hope for 20 minutes. And Victoria Hartwell was nothing if not tenacious. She'd built an empire from ruins. She'd learned to walk the world from a wheelchair. She could certainly track down one confused, well-meaning stranger. And when she did, she'd decide whether he deserved her anger or her forgiveness. Or maybe, just maybe, something else entirely. 3 days passed, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something terrible to happen. He kept expecting a lawsuit to arrive in the mail, or police to show up at his door, or at the very least a scathing email from Victoria Hartwell's lawyers explaining exactly how he'd committed fraud and misrepresentation. But nothing came, just silence, and the guilt that followed him like a shadow. Work was a welcome distraction. Marcus spent his days in a small office park on the outskirts of the city, managing logistics for a mid-sized shipping company. It was detail-oriented work that required focus. the kind of job where you tracked containers across oceans and coordinated delivery schedules and dealt with customs paperwork that made your eyes cross. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, and stability was everything when you had a 7-year-old depending on you. His coworker Jennifer noticed his distraction on the second day. "You okay?" she asked, leaning against his cubicle wall with a coffee mug that read "World's Okayest Employee." "You've been staring at that same spreadsheet for like 20 minutes. Marcus blinked, refocusing on his computer screen. "Just tired." Danny had a rough night. It was a lie, but a convenient one. Jennifer had kids of her own. She understood the universal excuse of parental exhaustion. The truth was Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, a 5-year-old girl trapped in silence, and a mother desperate enough to meet with strangers in expensive restaurants hoping for a miracle. He kept imagining what it would be like if Danny stopped talking, if that constant stream of questions and observations and made-up songs just disappeared one day. The thought made his chest physically hurt. He wasn't a therapist. He had no training, no expertise, no right to even think he could help. But that didn't stop him from researching. Late at night, after Danny was asleep, Marcus found himself falling down internet rabbit holes about selective mutism. He read academic papers he barely understood, parent forums filled with desperate questions, success stories and heartbreaking setbacks. He learned that it wasn't about a child choosing not to speak. It was about anxiety so overwhelming that speech became physically impossible in certain situations. That forcing or pressuring a child to talk usually made things worse. That patience, understanding, and creating safe spaces were the foundations of any successful treatment. He didn't know why he was doing it. It wasn't like he'd ever see Victoria or her daughter again. The research was pointless, a way to assuage guilt that couldn't actually be assuaged. But he kept reading anyway, kept learning, kept feeling this strange pull toward a problem that wasn't his to solve. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus picked up Danny from school like always. His son came bounding out of the building with his backpack half open and his jacket tied around his waist, already talking before he even reached the car. "Daddy, guess what? We're doing a project about community helpers, and I picked you, and tomorrow we have to bring someone from our family to talk about their job, and you have to come." "Okay, you have to." Marcus felt his heart squeeze. Community helpers. He managed shipping routes. He wasn't a firefighter or a doctor or someone who did anything particularly interesting, but Danny was looking at him with those bright, expectant eyes like Marcus was the most important person in the world. "Of course I'll come, buddy. What do I need to bring?" "Just you," Danny said, buckling himself into his booster seat. "And maybe you can bring one of those big maps you have, the ones with all the ships on them. Those are..." Marcus smiled despite himself. Maps he could do. He spent the drive home listening to Danny chatter about his friend Miguel's dad, who was a dentist, and Sophie's mom was a veterinarian, and how Danny was sure his dad's job was the best because ships were basically like pirates but with paperwork. That evening, while Danny worked on his homework at the kitchen table, Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" There was a brief pause, and then a woman's voice, professional and cool. "Is this Marcus Chun?" His blood turned to ice. He recognized that voice. Not Victoria's, but someone who worked for her, maybe. Someone with authority and purpose. "Yes," he said carefully. "Who's calling?" "My name is Patricia Reeves. I'm calling on behalf of Victoria Hartwell. She'd like to speak with you." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. He looked at Danny, bent over his math homework, blissfully unaware that his father's past deception was catching up with him. "I don't think that's a good idea," Marcus said quietly, moving into the living room for privacy. "I already apologized. I don't know what else I can say." "Ms. Hartwell isn't interested in an apology," Patricia replied. "She's interested in a conversation tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at the Madison Street Park. Just a conversation, Mr. Chun. No lawyers, no drama. Just two people talking." Marcus wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at him to decline, to protect himself and his son from whatever complications this could bring. But that same stubborn conscience that had made him sit at the wrong table in the first place wouldn't let him refuse. He owed her an explanation at the very least. A real one, not the panicked half-confession he'd thrown at her before fleeing. "I'll be there," he said, and hung up before he could change his mind. That night, Marcus barely slept. He rehearsed what he'd say, how he'd explain the impossible situation he'd been put in, how the deception hadn't been malicious, but rather a series of terrible decisions cascading into catastrophe. None of his rehearsed speeches sounded adequate. They all just sounded like excuses. Friday morning was the school presentation. Marcus stood in front of Danny's second-grade class. 18 small faces looking up at him with varying degrees of interest, and talked about shipping logistics. He'd brought a large map showing trade routes across the Pacific, and he explained how toys and clothes and food traveled on massive container ships from one side of the world to the other. He talked about how every item they owned had probably been on a ship at some point, how his job was making sure those items got where they needed to go on time safely. The kids asked questions. "Do pirates still exist?" "Yes, actually, in some parts of the world." "Have you ever been on a ship? A few times for work?" "What's the biggest thing you ever shipped?" "Once, a full-sized carousel for an amusement park." That answer got impressed gasps, but it was Danny's face that mattered most. His son watched him with pure pride, like Marcus was describing the most important job in the world, and maybe to Danny he was. After the presentation, Danny threw his arms around Marcus's waist. "You did so good, Daddy. Everyone thought you were cool." Marcus hugged him back, breathing in the smell of his son's shampoo, feeling the weight of how much this little person loved him. This was real. This was what mattered. Not expensive restaurants or billionaire CEOs or problems that weren't his to solve. But at 1:45 that afternoon, after dropping Danny at Emma's house with a promise to pick him up in a few hours, Marcus found himself driving toward Madison Street Park anyway, because he was many things, but a coward wasn't one of them. Or at least he was trying not to be. The park was one of those carefully maintained urban green spaces. All manicured grass and winding paths and benches strategically placed for optimal people watching. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early and immediately spotted her. Victoria Hartwell sat near a small pond, her wheelchair positioned at an angle that gave her a view of the water. She was dressed more casually than at the restaurant, in dark jeans and a cream sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger like this, less intimidating, more human. Marcus approached slowly, his heart hammering. She looked up when he was about 10 feet away and their eyes met. There was no anger in her expression, which somehow made it worse. Just a calm, assessing curiosity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Chun," she said, gesturing to the bench beside her, "thank you for coming." Marcus sat, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence stretched between them for a long moment, broken only by the distant laughter of children playing and the gentle sound of water lapping at the pond's edge. "I need you to explain something to me," Victoria finally said, her voice measured. "That night at the restaurant, you weren't there to meet me, were you?" It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. "No. I was supposed to be meeting someone else. A blind date my sister set up. The hostess asked me to sit at your table for just a minute while they sorted out a reservation mix-up. She said you couldn't be seen sitting alone, that there were sometimes photographers." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. "That sounds like something my staff would absolutely say." She looked out at the water. "So you agreed to this deception to help a hostess keep her job. That's your defense." When she put it that way, it sounded absurd. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "I know how it sounds. I should have told you immediately. I tried to, but you started talking about your daughter and I just..." He trailed off, not sure how to explain the paralysis that had gripped him, the inability to hurt someone who was already hurting so much. "You listened," Victoria said softly. "That's what you did. You listened like you actually cared, and then you ran." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not anger but confusion, maybe even hurt. "I did care," he said, the words coming out more forcefully than he'd intended. "Everything you said about Sophia, about not being able to reach her. I have a son. He's 7. And the thought of losing his voice, of not being able to hear him, it terrified me. So yes, I cared. That's why I ran, because I'm not who you thought I was. I can't help her. I'm just a guy who manages shipping containers and reads bedtime stories. I'm not a miracle worker." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those intelligent, penetrating eyes. "Then what are you doing here, Mr. Chun? You could have ignored my assistant's call. You could have refused to meet me. Why didn't you?" Marcus didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe he did and he was just afraid to say it out loud. "Because I owed you the truth. The whole truth, not just a panicked apology while I was running away. You trusted me with something important, and I let you believe I was someone I'm not. That wasn't fair to you." Something in Victoria's expression shifted. The guardedness softened just a fraction. "You're right," she said, "it wasn't fair. But I've been lied to by experts, Mr. Chun, by people who wanted my money or my influence or just the story of sleeping with the paralyzed billionaire." She held up a hand when he started to protest. "I'm not saying you're like them. What I'm saying is that I've become very good at recognizing real versus performance. And that night, sitting across from you, I saw something real. The question I've been asking myself for 3 days is why I can't just let it go." She turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw the vulnerability beneath the composed exterior. "The truth is, for 20 minutes I felt hope, and I haven't felt that in a very long time." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. A door he'd been keeping firmly closed starting to crack open. This wasn't about deception anymore. This was about two people who'd accidentally found something real in the middle of a lie. "I don't know what you want from me," Marcus said quietly. "I already told you I can't help your daughter. I'm not qualified." Victoria tilted her head slightly, a gesture that reminded him of Danny when he was working through a particularly challenging problem. "What if I'm not asking you to help her? What if I'm asking you to just meet her?" Marcus blinked, confused. What difference would that make? Victoria leaned back in her wheelchair, her gaze drifting to a young mother across the pond, pushing a little girl on a swing. The child's laughter carried across the water, bright and unrestrained. "In the last 8 months," she said, "I've brought 14 different specialists into my home. 14 highly credentialed, internationally recognized experts. Each one came with their theories and their treatment plans and their carefully calibrated approaches. They took notes. They ran assessments. They turned my daughter into a case study." She looked back at Marcus and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, bone deep and overwhelming. Not one of them saw her, Mr. Chun. They saw a diagnosis. They saw a puzzle to solve. They saw a success story they could add to their resumes. But not one of them saw a little girl who's scared and lonely and desperate for someone to understand her without making her into a project. Marcus felt the words land like stones in his stomach. "I'm not a therapist," he said again, but the protest sounded weaker even to his own ears. "I know," Victoria said simply. "That's exactly why I'm asking. Because you don't have a treatment protocol, you don't have a reputation to protect. You're just a father who understands what it means to love a child more than anything else in the world. The silence returned, but it was different now. Less adversarial, more contemplative. Marcus watched the mother and daughter across the pond, the child now chasing ducks with the fearless enthusiasm only young children possessed. He thought about the research he'd been doing, all those late nights reading about selective mutism, about creating safe spaces and building trust and never forcing a child to perform. If I met her, he said slowly, carefully, what would you expect to happen? Nothing, Victoria replied immediately. That's the point. No expectations, no pressure, no grand goals. Just two people in the same room, letting whatever happens happen. Marcus looked at her, searching her face for any hint that this was manipulation, some elaborate scheme to get him to commit to something he wasn't qualified for. But all he saw was a mother who'd run out of options and was down to her last desperate hope. Why me? He asked. Why not find the real doctor? Richardson. Surely he's still available. I did find him, Victoria said. I met with him 2 days ago. And she turned her head away from the vulnerability of the admission. He was exactly what I expected. Professional, credentialed, confident in his methods. And when I described Sophia's case, he started talking about 12-week treatment protocols and behavioral modification techniques. He never once asked me what she liked to play with or what made her smile before she stopped talking. She looked back at Marcus, and there was something fierce in her expression now. You asked me about her favorite color. In the middle of that restaurant, while you were panicking and trying to figure out how to escape, you asked me if she had a favorite color. Nobody else has asked me that. They ask about symptoms and triggers and comorbidities. But you wanted to know about her, not her condition. Marcus felt his resistance crumbling. He thought about Danny, about how he'd feel if his son was lost in silence and some stranger offered to sit with him. No agenda, no expectations. He'd be terrified, but he'd also be desperate enough to try anything. 1 hour, he heard himself say. I'll meet her for 1 hour, at your home, with you present. No promises, no commitments beyond that. If she's uncomfortable or if I feel like I'm doing more harm than good, we stop him. Victoria's shoulders dropped slightly, tension releasing that Marcus hadn't even noticed she'd been carrying. Thank you, she said, and the gratitude in her voice was almost painful to hear. When? Tomorrow, Marcus said before he could reconsider. Saturday afternoon. I'll need to arrange childcare for my son, but I can be there at 2. Bring him, Victoria said suddenly. What? Bring your son. If Danny's there, Sophia might feel more comfortable. Less like a therapy session, more like just playing with another kid. Marcus started to protest, to explain all the ways that was a terrible idea, but Victoria held up a hand. Think about it. You said your son is 7, close enough in age that they might actually interact. And honestly, having another child around takes the pressure off, makes it feel less formal. Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself nodding. The truth was, getting a sitter on short notice was nearly impossible anyway, and Emma had plans tomorrow. Okay, he said, 2 o'clock tomorrow. But Victoria, I need you to understand something. I don't know what I'm doing. I might sit there for an hour and accomplish absolutely nothing. I might make things worse. If I do, you need to promise me you won't blame yourself. You're trying something. That's more than giving up. They exchanged phone numbers, and Victoria texted him her address. Marcus wasn't surprised to see it was in the most expensive neighborhood in the city, the kind of place where old money built mansions and new money built monuments. He stood to leave, feeling like he'd just agreed to something that was either going to be completely meaningless or completely life-changing, with no middle ground in between. Mr. Chun, Victoria called as he started to walk away. He turned back. Call me Victoria. I think we're past formalities at this point. He managed a small smile. Only if you call me Marcus. Deal, she said, and there was something in her expression that looked almost like relief, like she'd been carrying this burden alone for so long that sharing it, even with a stranger who managed shipping containers, felt like a reprieve. Marcus walked back to his car feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff. He had no idea if there was solid ground below or just a long fall waiting, but he'd jumped, and now there was no going back. That evening, he tried to explain it to Danny without revealing too much. Hey buddy, tomorrow afternoon we're gonna visit a new friend. She has a daughter about your age. Really? Danny said, looking up from his Lego creation with immediate interest. What's her name, Sophia? And Danny, she's a little shy. She doesn't talk much, so we need to be extra kind and patient with her, okay? Danny nodded solemnly, taking on the serious expression he got when Marcus explained important thing. I'll be really nice, Daddy. I promise. Does she like dinosaurs? I don't know, Marcus admitted. Maybe you can bring some of your small ones and find out. Danny immediately ran to his room to begin selecting the perfect dinosaur ambassadors for this diplomatic mission, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his growing anxiety. He spent the rest of the evening researching again, but this time with a specific focus. What did you do when meeting a child with selective mutism for the first time? The advice was consistent across sources. Don't pressure them to talk. Don't make talking the goal. Don't even bring attention to the fact that they're not talking. Instead, engage in parallel play. Be present, but not demanding. Let the child set the pace and the comfort level. Accept any form of communication, whether it's gestures, drawings, or just eye contact. Marcus could do that, maybe. He was good at meeting kids where they were. Danny had always been outgoing and talkative, but Marcus had watched him with shyer children at the playground, seen how naturally he adapted his energy to match theirs. If nothing else, maybe Danny would be the bridge. Kids had a way of connecting that adults had forgotten. At midnight, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "I'm not expecting miracles tomorrow." Just so we're clear, her concern was touching. The careful way she was trying to manage both their expectations. He typed back, "Good, because I don't have any to offer. Just a weird kid who loves dinosaurs and a dad who's nervous about this whole thing." Her response came a minute later. "Perfect. We'll see you at 2. And Marcus, thank you for taking the jump." He stared at that message for a long time. Taking the jump. That's exactly what it felt like. A leap of faith into unknown territory with nothing but good intentions and a willingness to try. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. He fell asleep that night with his phone on his chest, already dreading and anticipating tomorrow in equal measure, already wondering if he was about to become part of something meaningful or just another disappointing chapter in Victoria Hartwell's long story of failed hope. Victoria Hartwell's home was exactly what Marcus had expected and somehow still more intimidating than he'd imagined. The building was a modern architectural statement, all glass and steel and clean lines, rising 3 stories above a meticulously landscaped property that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. The gate required a code, which Victoria had texted him that morning. The driveway was longer than the entire street Marcus lived on. Danny pressed his face against the car window, his eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, this house is like a castle. Does a princess live here?" "Sort of," Marcus said, parking his humble Civic between what looked like a Tesla and a vintage Mercedes. "Remember what I said about being polite?" Danny nodded, clutching his carefully selected bag of dinosaurs. "I'll use my inside voice and say please and thank you, and I won't touch anything unless they say I can." "Good man," Marcus said, ruffling his son's hair. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervous energy thrumming through his body, and led Danny up the front steps. Before he could even ring the bell, the door opened. A woman in her 50s, dressed in professional but comfortable clothing, smiled at them warmly. "You must be Marcus and Danny. I'm Helen, Ms. Hartwell's assistant. Please, come in." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, but warmer somehow. There were signs of actual life here. A child's drawing stuck to the refrigerator visible through the open concept layout. Toys tucked into a basket near the living room, a blanket draped over one of the pristine white couches. It was a home trying very hard to be lived in, despite the museum qualities surrounding. Victoria appeared from a hallway, wheeling herself toward them with that same composed grace Marcus remembered from the park. Behind her, moving slowly and staying close to her mother's wheelchair, was a little girl. Sophia was tiny for 5, with long dark hair pulled into a ponytail and enormous brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. She wore a purple dress with unicorns on it and held a stuffed rabbit that had clearly been loved nearly to death, its fur worn smooth in places from constant holding. "Marcus," Victoria said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you for coming. And you must be Danny." Danny, who could be shy around adults but was fearless with other kids, stepped forward with his hand extended like Marcus had taught him. "Hi, I'm Danny. I'm 7. I like dinosaurs and building things and sometimes reading. Do you like any of those things?" Sophia didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes fixed on Danny with an intensity that suggested she'd heard every word. Danny, unfazed by the lack of response, continued cheerfully. "I brought some of my dinosaurs if you want to see them. They're really cool. This one's a T-Rex and this one's a Stegosaurus, but my favorite is the Brachiosaurus because it has a really long neck." He was already pulling plastic dinosaurs from his bag, lining them up on the floor with the careful precision of a child who took his collection seriously. Sophia watched, her grip on the rabbit tightening slightly, but she didn't retreat. That felt like progress, though Marcus wasn't sure. "Why don't we go to the playroom?" Victoria suggested, gesturing toward a room off the main living area. "It's more comfortable there." The playroom was incredible, the kind of space every child dreamed of. There was a reading nook with built-in bookshelves, a art station with every supply imaginable, a dress-up corner with costumes, and an entire wall of toys organized in clear containers. But what caught Marcus's attention was how many of the toys looked untouched. This was a room filled with things bought to encourage play, but there was a stillness to it that suggested not much playing actually happened here. Danny, characteristically oblivious to the tension, immediately made himself at home. He settled cross-legged on the soft rug and began arranging his dinosaurs into what he announced was a dinosaur family meeting. "This is the dad's dinosaur," he narrated, holding up the Brachiosaurus. "He takes care of all the little dinosaurs and makes sure they're safe, and this is the kid dinosaur who asks a million questions. That's me." Sophia remained by her mother's side, watching Danny's elaborate setup with those intense, intelligent eyes. Marcus caught Victoria's gaze. She looked nervous, hopeful, scared all at once. He gave her a small nod and then did something that felt counterintuitive. He turned away from Sophia completely. He walked over to the bookshelf and began examining the titles, making a show of being interested in the books rather than the silent child. "Danny, what do you think about this one?" he said, pulling out a picture book about ocean animals. "Have we read this before?" "No," Danny said, not looking up from his dinosaurs. "But I like ocean animals too. Did you know that the blue whale is the biggest animal that ever lived? Even bigger than dinosaurs?" Marcus settled into a beanbag chair, opened the book, and started reading aloud. Not to Sophia, not to anyone in particular, just reading. his voice calm and steady, filling the silence with words and stories that asked nothing from anyone. He could see Sophia in his peripheral vision, the way she'd shifted slightly, angling her body to better see the pictures in the book while still maintaining her safe distance. Danny abandoned his dinosaur meeting and crawled over to listen, leaning against Marcus's legs with the comfortable ease of a child who'd spent his whole life being read to. The pictures are pretty, Danny said. Look, that's a jellyfish. Those are cool but also scary because they can sting you. Marcus turned the page and Sophia took a step closer, then another. Victoria held perfectly still, barely breathing, watching her daughter move toward the sound of Marcus's voice. Sophia stopped about 5 feet away, close enough to see the pictures, but not close enough to be part of the group. It was a compromise, a way of being present without commitment. Marcus kept reading. He finished the ocean book and picked up another one, this time about a mouse who went on an adventure. Danny interjected with comments and questions, and Marcus answered, maintaining the gentle rhythm of their conversation. And slowly, incrementally, Sophia moved closer. By the third book, she was sitting on the edge of the rug, her rabbit clutched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the pages. Danny, with the social brilliance that children sometimes possessed, didn't acknowledge her arrival. He just shifted slightly, making room, treating her presence as natural and expected rather than noteworthy. Marcus felt his heart squeezed with pride for his son, for this small boy who understood instinctively what many adults never learned, that sometimes the greatest kindness was acting like everything was normal when nothing felt normal at all. After the fourth book, Marcus set it aside and stretched. "I'm getting a little tired of reading," he said to Danny. "What should we do now?" Danny immediately grabbed his dinosaurs again. "We should finish the meeting. The dinosaurs have to decide where to go on vacation." Marcus smiled and joined him on the floor, picking up the T-Rex. "I think this one wants to go to the beach." "The beach is good," Danny agreed seriously, "but there's no trees for the Brachiosaurus to eat. That's a problem. Maybe we need to find a place with both beaches and trees," Marcus suggested. "Do those exist?" Danny frowned, genuinely pondering the geographical question. "I think so. Maybe like an island or something." Movement caught Marcus's eye. Sophia had set down her rabbit. Her small hand reached out and picked up the Stegosaurus, the one Danny had said was cool but not his favorite. She held it, turning it over in her hands, examining the plastic plates on its back. Then, with excruciating slowness, she placed it next to Marcus's T-Rex. It was the smallest gesture. It would have been meaningless in any other context. But in this moment, in this room, with this child who hadn't communicated with the outside world in 8 months, it was everything. Marcus didn't react, didn't make a big deal of it. He just picked up another dinosaur and continued the game. "Oh, good," he said casually. "The Stegosaurus can help us decide. What do you think? Should we go to the beach or the mountains?" Danny, brilliant Danny, immediately turned to the Stegosaurus as if it was a full participant. "We need your vote, dinosaur. Beach or mountains?" Sophia's hand moved again, this time pushing the Stegosaurus toward a spot on the rug between 2 of Danny's dinosaurs. Danny gasped with delight. She voted for both. "The island idea, that's so smart." Marcus glanced at Victoria. She had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. This was more than her daughter had engaged with anyone in months, more than all the specialists with their protocols and their clinical approaches had achieved. And it had happened because 2 kids were playing with plastic dinosaurs on a rug, with no expectations and no pressure, and no one telling them how it was supposed to go. For the next 40 minutes, the 3 of them played. Sophia never spoke, never made a sound, but she participated. She moved dinosaurs, she arranged them into groups. She even smiled once when Danny made the T-Rex dramatically fall over after losing a fight with the Brachiosaurus. It was the most normal, unremarkable play session imaginable, and it was a miracle. When it was time to leave, Danny started packing up his dinosaurs. Then he paused, looking at the Stegosaurus still sitting on the rug. He picked it up and held it out to Sophia. "You can keep this one if you want," he said, "since it helped us decide about the island. You need to take good care of it though, okay? Dinosaurs are very important." Sophia took the dinosaur with both hands, cradling it like it was made of glass. She looked at Danny, and then she did something that made everyone in the room freeze. She smiled. Not a big smile, not a laugh, but a genuine, grateful smile that lit up her entire face. "Thank you," she mouthed. No sound coming out, but the words clear on her lips. Victoria made a small sound, something between a sob and a laugh. Marcus felt his own throat tighten. It wasn't speech, not yet, but it was communication, intentional and clear. It was Sophia reaching out from her silence to connect with someone who'd shown her kindness without demanding anything in return. At the door, Victoria caught Marcus's arm. "I don't know what just happened," she whispered, "but thank you." Marcus shook his head. "Danny did it. Kids understand each other in ways we forget, but you created the space for it," Victoria said. "You didn't push, didn't force, didn't make her feel like she had to perform. You just let her be, and that's what she needed." On the drive home, Danny chattered about Sophia and how she was really nice even though she didn't talk, and how he hoped they could play again soon. Marcus listened, responding when appropriate, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about a little girl holding a plastic dinosaur like it was treasure, about a mother's tears of hope, about how sometimes the most profound help you could offer someone was just showing up and being present. No expertise required, just humanity. The text from Victoria came at 7 the next morning, early enough that Marcus was still making breakfast while Danny watched cartoons in his pajamas. "Last night, Sophia slept with that dinosaur. First time she's slept through the night in 3 weeks. Can we do this again?" Marcus stared at his phone, syrup dripping from the spoon he'd forgotten he was holding. He'd been telling himself that yesterday was a one-time thing, that he'd done his good deed and could now return to his normal life with a clear conscience. But seeing those words, knowing that his presence, his son's kindness, had given a desperate mother one peaceful night, made it impossible to walk away. Same time next Saturday, he typed back. Victoria's response was immediate. Yes, thank you. Doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. That's how it started. Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, Marcus and Danny would drive to the house that looked like a castle, and they'd spend 2 hours in the playroom. Sometimes they played with dinosaurs. Sometimes Danny brought his Lego sets and built elaborate structures while Sophia watched and occasionally handed him pieces. Sometimes Marcus read books while both children listened, Sophia inching closer each week until she was sitting right beside them. The changes in Sophia were gradual but undeniable. By the third week, she was initiating interactions, bringing toys to Danny to show him, arranging stuffed animals into scenes that told silent stories. By the fifth week, she laughed out loud when Danny made a ridiculous voice for the T-Rex, a sound so unexpected that she immediately covered her mouth with both hands, looking shocked at herself, but she was laughing. She was making sound. It was progress. Victoria watched these sessions with the intensity of someone witnessing a miracle in real time. She never hovered, never interfered, but Marcus could feel her presence in the room like a held breath. After each session, while the kids transitioned to snack time under Helen's supervision, Marcus and Victoria would sit in the kitchen and talk. Those conversations started as debriefings about Sophia's progress, but evolved into something else entirely. They talked about parenthood, about the impossible weight of being solely responsible for another human's well-being. Victoria told him about the accident that had taken her father and her ability to walk, about the months of physical therapy and the slow, painful process of rebuilding herself. Not just learning to live with paralysis, but learning to live as someone different than who she'd been before. Marcus told her about his wife's death, about how Sarah had declined so rapidly that he'd barely had time to process what was happening before she was gone, about the impossible task of explaining death to a 4-year-old who kept asking when mommy was coming home, about the years of just surviving, of getting through each day without thinking too far ahead because the future felt too overwhelming to contemplate. Their shared experience of loss created a foundation of understanding that neither of them had expected to find. Victoria didn't treat Marcus like he was beneath her because he managed shipping routes instead of running a billion-dollar company. And Marcus didn't treat Victoria like she was fragile because she used a wheelchair. They just talked, two people who'd been through hell and somehow found themselves on the other side, still standing. By the 8th week, something had shifted. Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria when he should have been focused on work, the way she tilted her head when she was considering something, the rare, brilliant smile that transformed her face when Sophia did something new, the intelligence in her eyes, the way she listened like she was actually hearing him, not just waiting for her turn to talk. He told himself it was just friendship, just gratitude for the chance to help someone. But when his sister Emma asked him why he was smiling at his phone, and he realized it was because Victoria had sent him a funny story about something Sophia had done, he had to admit the truth was more complicated. Victoria was experiencing her own revelation. For the first time since her divorce, since Julian had left her for someone who could walk beside him instead of rolling beside him, she felt seen by a man. Not as a tragic figure, not as a conquest, not as a bank account with a pretty face attached. Marcus looked at her and saw a person, a mother, a woman, someone worth spending time with even when there was nothing to gain from it. She caught herself checking the calendar to see how many days until Saturday. She started making excuses to text him during the week, questions about Sophia that could have waited, but that gave her a reason to see his name on her screen. She noticed things about him. The way he was patient with both children without being condescending. The laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he'd smiled a lot before grief had taken up residence in his life. The careful way he chose his words, always thoughtful, never careless. Helen noticed, of course. The assistant who'd been with Victoria for nearly a decade could read her moods better than anyone. "You're different lately," Helen observed one Thursday afternoon while they were reviewing schedules. "Lighter. It's nice to see." Victoria tried to deflect, attributing it to Sophia's progress, but Helen just gave her a knowing look. "It's not just about Sophia, is it?" The 10th Saturday brought rain, one of those spring storms that turned the sky dark and made staying inside feel like a gift rather than a constraint. Marcus and Danny arrived soaked, despite the short dash from the car to the front door. Danny thought it was hilarious, shaking his wet hair like a dog while Sophia watched with wide eyes from the safety of the dry hallway. Helen appeared with towels, and Victoria insisted they raid her late father's closet for something dry for Marcus to change into while his clothes went in the dryer. It felt strangely intimate, standing in her father's old office while she pulled out a sweater and jeans that would probably fit. "You don't have to," Marcus said, but Victoria shook her head. "I want to. These clothes should be worn, not sitting in a closet like a memorial." The sweater was soft, expensive in that way where you could feel the quality of the fabric. Marcus felt like an imposter wearing it, but Victoria's expression when he emerged made him forget his discomfort. "It looks good on you," she said, and there was something in her voice, something warm and interested that made his pulse quicken. The kids were already deep in play when they returned to the playroom. Danny had discovered a bin of dress-up clothes and was trying on various capes and hats while Sophia watched with barely contained delight. "Look, Daddy, I'm a superhero." Danny announced, striking a pose with a red cape billowing behind him. "Sophia, you should be a superhero too. We can fight bad guys together." To everyone's shock, Sophia walked over to the dress-up bin and pulled out a purple cape. She fastened it around her neck and stood beside Danny, copying his power pose. For a moment, just a brief shining moment, she looked like any other 5-year-old girl playing make-believe with a friend, not a child trapped in silence, just a kid being a kid. Marcus and Victoria exchanged a look, one of those glances that contained entire conversations. "We did this," the look said. "We created this space where she can be normal, where she can heal." The weight of that shared accomplishment settled between them, connecting them in a way that felt profound and permanent. As the afternoon wore on and the rain continued to drum against the windows, Marcus realized he didn't want to leave. Not just because Sophia was thriving, but because being in this house with Victoria felt like coming home in a way his own apartment never had. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Victoria felt it too, this shift in the air between them. When their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same book to show the kids, the contact felt electric. When Marcus smiled at her over the children's heads, she felt her heart do something it hadn't done in years. It reminded her she was alive, that she was allowed to want things beyond her daughter's recovery. That evening, after Marcus and Danny had left, after Sophia was tucked in bed still wearing her purple cape, Victoria sat alone in her living room and allowed herself to acknowledge what was happening. She was falling for Marcus Chun, this kind, patient man who'd stumbled into her life through the most absurd circumstances. This man who asked for nothing, who showed up every week for a child who wasn't his, who made her laugh and made her think and made her feel like maybe, just maybe, happy endings weren't just for other people. The question was what to do about it. Marcus gave no indication that he felt the same way. He was professional, appropriate, never crossing the invisible line between helping with Sophia and anything personal. Maybe that's all this was to him, a good deed, a way to honor his late wife's memory by helping another child. The thought made Victoria's chest ache, but she forced herself to consider it. She'd been wrong about people before. She'd trusted Julian, and look how that had ended. But Marcus wasn't Julian. He'd proven that over and over. Still, the fear remained. What if she was misreading everything? What if she opened herself up and he stepped back, uncomfortable with her feelings? She couldn't bear to lose what they'd built, not just for herself, but for Sophia. Her daughter needed this stability, this weekly ritual that was slowly bringing her back to the world. So Victoria did nothing. She held her feelings close, protected them like the fragile, dangerous things they were, and told herself that being Marcus's friend was enough, that watching her daughter heal was enough, that she didn't need anything more. But late at night, when the house was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts, she admitted the truth. She wanted more. She wanted everything. And that terrified her more than anything else in her carefully controlled life. The 12th Saturday started like all the others, but it ended with everything changing. Marcus arrived with Danny as usual, both of them carrying a special surprise. Danny had insisted they bring ingredients to make cookies, convinced that Sophia would love the activity. Marcus had been skeptical, worried about making a mess in Victoria's pristine kitchen, but Victoria had surprised him by being enthusiastic about the idea. The kitchen became a disaster zone of flour and chocolate chips and laughter. Danny showed Sophia how to roll the dough into balls, and she participated fully, her small hands dusted white, her face serious with concentration. When Victoria tried to help, getting flour on her dark sweater, Marcus reached out instinctively to brush it away. Their eyes met, his hand still resting on her shoulder, and the moment stretched into something charged and unmistakable. Marcus pulled back quickly, clearing his throat, pretending intense interest in the oven temperature. But the damage was done. The careful boundary he'd been maintaining had cracked, and they both knew it. Victoria looked away, her cheeks flushed, and suggested the kids could watch a movie while the cookies baked. They settled the children in the media room with an animated film about dragons, and Marcus followed Victoria to the kitchen to clean up the flour explosion. They worked in silence at first, the air thick with unspoken thing. Victoria was wiping down the counter when she finally spoke. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." He paused, dish towel in hand, his heart suddenly hammering. "Okay, I know what you've been doing for Sophia, what you and Danny have given us. It's more than I ever hoped for." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "But I need you to know that I've started to feel something I didn't expect, something beyond gratitude." Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. Victoria was looking at him with complete vulnerability, all her usual composure stripped away. "I understand if that makes things uncomfortable," she continued quickly. "I understand if you want to stop coming, but I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. I respect you too much to lie." Before Marcus could respond, before he could tell her that he felt the same terrifying pull toward her, the doorbell rang. Victoria's expression shifted immediately, confusion replacing vulnerability. "I'm not expecting anyone," she said, wheeling toward the front door. Marcus followed, suddenly uneasy. Through the glass panels beside the door, Marcus could see a man, tall, handsome in that casual, artistic way, with perfectly tousled hair and expensive clothes, trying to look effortless. Victoria's entire body went rigid. "Julian," she said, the name coming out like a curse. Her ex-husband. Marcus had seen photos online during his initial research, but seeing the man in person was different. Julian had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, the easy charm of someone who'd always been able to smile his way through consequences. He saw Victoria through the glass and waved, as if showing showing up unannounced at your ex-wife's home was completely normal. Victoria opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What are you doing here, Julian?" Julian's smile didn't waver. "Can't a father visit his daughter? It's been too long." "You don't get to do this," Victoria said, her voice ice cold. "You don't get to just show up without warning after 8 months of silence. You gave up that right." Julian's eyes shifted past her, landing on Marcus standing in the hallway. His expression changed, something calculating sliding behind the charm. "And who's this? I didn't realize you had company." Marcus started to introduce himself, but Victoria cut him off. "This is none of your business. Leave, Julian. Now." But Julian was already pushing past her, his voice taking on a wounded tone. "I have a right to see my daughter, Victoria. You can't keep her from me." The sound of Julian's voice must have carried to the media room, because suddenly there was Sophia, standing in the hallway with Danny behind her. The little girl froze when she saw her father, every bit of progress from the past months vanishing as her face went pale with fear. "Sophia, baby," Julian said, dropping into a crouch with his arms open. "Come give Daddy a hug." But Sophia didn't move. She backed up instead, pressing herself against the wall, shaking her head mutely. The rejection was visible and complete. Julian's face darkened with hurt pride. "What have you been telling her about me, Victoria? What poison have you been feeding our daughter?" Marcus saw it happening in slow motion, saw Sophia's terror, saw Victoria's rage, saw Danny's confusion, and he saw Julian, this man who'd abandoned his family and now wanted to waltz back and demanding affection like it was owed to him. Something protective and fierce rose in Marcus's chest. "I think you should leave," Marcus said quietly, stepping forward to stand between Julian and the children. Julian straightened, his height advantage clear. "And I think you should mind your own business. You have no idea what's going on here." "You're right," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I don't know your history, but I know that little girl is terrified, and you pushing yourself on her is making it worse. So I'm asking you to leave." "Who is this guy, Victoria?" Julian demanded, his charm completely gone now. "Your new boyfriend? Is this what you're exposing our daughter to? Random men playing house?" The accusation was so far off base and yet so close to Marcus's own insecurities that it hit like a punch. He wasn't playing house. He was helping a child. He was being a friend. But hearing it framed that way through Julian's contemptuous lens made everything feel sordid and inappropriate. "Get out," Victoria said, her voice shaking with fury. "Get out of my house right now or I'm calling the police." Julian held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, I'll go. But this isn't over, Victoria. I have rights, and I'm going to exercise them." He looked at Marcus with undisguised contempt. "Enjoy playing hero, friend, but you're way out of your depth here." The moment the door closed behind Julian, Sophia burst into tears. Not the silent tears she sometimes shed, but full sobbing, the kind that came from a place of deep trauma surfacing. Victoria tried to reach her, but Sophia was beyond comfort, beyond reach. She crumpled to the floor, and all the walls she'd slowly been dismantling came crashing back up in an instant. Marcus felt his heart break. 12 weeks of progress, of careful bridge building, shattered in 5 minutes by a selfish man who couldn't see past his own ego. Danny, confused and upset by Sophia's reaction, started crying too, which only made everything worse. The careful peace they'd built had been demolished, and Marcus didn't know how to put it back together. Victoria was trying to hold Sophia, trying to soothe her, but nothing was working. The girl was inconsolable, locked back in her silent prison. All the recent gains vanished like they'd never existed. Marcus picked up Danny, holding his son close, feeling like he was witnessing something he had no right to see. This was a family matter. This was between Victoria and Julian and their daughter. He was just an outsider who'd inserted himself where he didn't belong. Maybe Julian was right. Maybe Marcus was playing hero, thinking he could fix things with his limited understanding and good intentions. Maybe he'd made everything worse by creating a safe space that could be so icily destroyed. The weight of that possibility pressed down on him like a physical force. "I should go," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over Sophia's sobs. Victoria looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "Marcus, no." But he was already backing toward the door, Danny still in his arms, his son's face buried in his shoulder. "I'm sorry. This is family business. I shouldn't be here." "Wait," Victoria said, her voice desperate now. She tried to follow him, but Sophia was clinging to her, making it impossible to move. "Marcus, please, don't let him chase you away. We need you." But Marcus was already at the door, already leaving, already retreating to the safety of his small, uncomplicated life where he understood the rules and didn't accidentally insert himself into situations that could hurt vulnerable children. He heard Victoria calling his name as he got to his car, but he didn't stop. He couldn't, because Julian's words had struck too close to home. Marcus was out of his depth. He had been from the beginning. He'd let himself believe he was helping, but maybe he'd just been feeding his own ego, his own need to feel useful after years of feeling like he wasn't enough. He'd failed his wife. Maybe he was failing Sophia too. The drive home was silent except for Danny's sniffles. "Daddy, why did that man make Sophia so sad?" Danny asked in a small voice. "Because sometimes grown-ups hurt people without meaning to," Marcus answered, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "But we can't fix everything, buddy. Sometimes we have to let people solve their own problems." Even as he said it, he knew he was lying to himself. This wasn't about letting people solve their own problems. This was about him being scared. Scared of getting deeper into Victoria's complicated world. Scared of caring too much and losing again. Scared of being inadequate, of being exposed as the fraud Julian had essentially called him. He'd been playing pretend in a world he didn't belong to. In reality, had just crashed the party. His phone started ringing before they even got home. Victoria calling. He let it go to voicemail. She called again and again. He turned off the phone, unable to face her voice, unable to explain that he was doing what was best for everyone by walking away, because that's what cowards did. They convinced themselves that running was actually a noble sacrifice, that their absence was a gift rather than an abandonment. That night, after Danny was asleep, Marcus sat in the dark of his living room and let himself acknowledge the truth. He'd fallen for Victoria Hartwell, completely, irrevocably, terrifyingly. And that's exactly why he had to stay away. She deserved someone from her world, someone who understood the complications of wealth and custody battles and ex-husbands who could hire armies of lawyers. She deserved someone whole, not a widower still carrying the ghost of his first love. She deserved better than a man who managed shipping containers and ran at the first sign of conflict. The apartment felt emptier than it had in years. The silence pressed in on him, reminding him of all the Saturdays he wouldn't have now. No more watching Sophia emerge from her shell. No more conversations with Victoria that made him feel seen. No more building something beautiful out of accidental beginning. He'd given it up to protect everyone involved. That's what he told himself, that he was being selfless. But sitting alone in the dark, Marcus knew the truth. He was being a coward. And cowardice, no matter how well-intentioned, is just another word for giving up. Victoria Hartwell had built an empire by refusing to accept defeat. She'd learned to walk the world from a wheelchair, not through acceptance, but through sheer stubborn will. She'd survived a divorce designed to humiliate her. Survived tabloids dissecting her personal tragedy for entertainment, survived being written off as damaged goods. She was not about to let Julian destroy what she'd built with Marcus, and she was certainly not about to let Marcus run away because he was scared. The night after he left, after Sophia finally cried herself to sleep, Victoria sat in her office and made a decision. She would fight for her daughter, yes, but also for herself. For the first time since her marriage had imploded, she wanted something for herself, not just for Sophia. She wanted Marcus Chun, and she was going to tell him that, whether he liked it or not. But first, she had to handle Julie. Her ex-husband had made his opening move by showing up unannounced. He'd filed for joint custody within 24 hours of that disastrous visit, his lawyers sending papers that painted Victoria as an unstable mother who'd isolated their daughter and introduced inappropriate men into her life. It was a calculated attack designed to hurt and intimidate. Julian had always been good at finding pressure points. What he didn't understand was that Victoria had spent 5 years learning to fight from a position everyone assumed was weak. She called her own lawyers, the best family law team money could buy, and gave them everything. Every documented absence from Julian's time as a father, every missed birthday, every broken promise, every tabloid photo of him partying while claiming he was too devastated to see his daughter. She'd been keeping records since the divorce, hoping she'd never need them. Now they became ammunition. More importantly, she reached out to Sophia's therapists, the ones who'd been documenting her selective mutism. They provided statements about Sophia's trauma response to her father's abandonment and his recent reappearance, about how the child's terror upon seeing Julian was a clear indicator of emotional distress associated with him. The picture these documents painted was damning. Julian wasn't a concerned father. He was a narcissist who wanted control and couldn't stand the idea of his daughter healing without him. But legal battles, even with the best lawyers, took time, and time was something Victoria couldn't afford to waste, because every day that passed without Marcus was another day Sophia retreated further into her shell. The little girl wouldn't play with the dinosaur Danny had given her. She wouldn't wear her purple cape. She spent hours sitting silently, staring at nothing, locked back in the prison of her own fear. Helen finally cornered Victoria 4 days after Marcus left. You need to call him. Whatever happened, whatever scared him away, you need to fix it, because that child is asking for him. Not with words, Victoria said bitterly. She's not asking for anything with words. With her eyes, Helen insisted. Every time someone comes to the door, she looks up, hoping it's them. She carries that dinosaur everywhere now, holding it like it's the last piece of something precious she lost. The words broke something in Victoria's carefully maintained composure. She'd been so focused on being strong, on fighting Julian, on managing the legal situation, that she hadn't let herself fully feel the loss of Marcus. But Helen was right. Sophia wasn't the only one hoping every visitor would be him. Victoria was too. That evening, she tried calling him again. His phone went straight to voicemail like it had for 4 days. She left a message, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. Marcus, I know you're scared. I know Julian made you question everything, but running away doesn't protect anyone. It just means he wins. And I refuse to let him win. Sophia needs you. Danny needs his Saturday playmate, and I need my friend. Please call me back. He didn't call. Meanwhile, across town in his small apartment, Marcus was discovering that running away didn't actually make the pain stop. Danny asked about Sophia every single day. When are we going back to see her, Dottie? Is she okay? Can I call her? The questions were knives, each one a reminder of what Marcus had walked away from. Work was impossible to focus on. Jennifer noticed, of course. You've been a zombie all week, she said bluntly during their lunch break. What's going on? Marcus shrugged, pushing food around his plate without eating. Just personal stuff. Family thing. Jennifer gave him a long, assessing look. The last time you were this miserable was right after Sarah died. I'm not trying to pry, but as your friend, I'm concerned. Whatever's going on, I hope you're not making it worse by dealing with it alone. Her words struck deeper than she knew. Marcus was dealing with it alone because that's what he did. He'd dealt with Sarah's illness alone, not wanting to burden anyone with his grief. He'd rebuilt his life as a single father alone, turning down help because asking felt like admitting weakness. He'd convinced himself that solitude was strength, that needing people was a liability. But sitting in his empty apartment every evening while Danny slept, Marcus was starting to realize that alone wasn't strong, it was just lonely. On the 5th day, Danny brought home a drawing from school. It was a picture of 4 stick figures, 2 tall ones and 2 small ones. They were holding hands and smiling. Above the picture, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, Danny had written "My family." Marcus stared at it, his throat tight. "Buddy, who's this?" he asked, pointing to the 4th figure, the one that wasn't him or Danny or Sarah's memory. "That's Sophia," Danny said matter-of-factly. "She's sad without us, Daddy. We need to go see her. She's my friend." Out of the mouths of children came the simplest, most devastating truths. Danny had claimed Sophia as family in his heart, had drawn them together like it was obvious and permanent, and Marcus had ripped that connection apart because he was scared. That night, after Danny was asleep, Marcus finally listened to Victoria's voicemail. Her voice was strong, determined, everything he'd expected, but there was something else underneath it too. Vulnerability, need. Not the desperate need of someone drowning, but the honest need of someone brave enough to admit they couldn't do everything alone. "I refuse to let him win," she'd said. The words echoed in Marcus's mind. Julian had won by making Marcus feel inadequate, by confirming every insecurity Marcus carried about not being enough, about being an outsider in Victoria's world, about having no right to insert himself into their lives. Julian had won by making Marcus run, and Victoria was right. That was unacceptable. Marcus thought about Sarah then. Really thought about her for the first time in days. What would she tell him to do? Sarah, who'd believed everyone had a song inside them if you just listened carefully enough. Sarah, who'd never let fear make her decisions. Sarah, who'd loved him not despite his ordinariness, but because of it. She would tell him to stop being an idiot. She would tell him that love wasn't about being perfect or qualified or from the right world. It was about showing up even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. He picked up his phone, his hands shaking slightly, and called Victoria back. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "Marcus," she breathed, and he could hear the relief in that single word. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming in a rush. "I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I let him get in my head. I'm sorry I abandoned you when you needed support. I'm sorry I made everything worse." "Stop," Victoria said firmly. "Stop apologizing and just tell me one thing. Are you done running?" Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of Danny's drawing, of Sophia's silent plea for help, of Victoria's courage in the face of everything trying to break her. "I'm done running," he said. "If you'll have me back, I'm done." The silence that followed felt different from all the other silences they'd shared. This one was full of possibility, of relief, of things neither of them was quite ready to say out loud yet. "Saturday," Victoria said finally, 2 o'clock. "But Marcus, when you come back, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Sophia anymore. This is about us too. I have feelings for you, real feeling. And if that scares you, if that's too much, then we need to figure it out now." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate, fear and hope tangled together so tightly he couldn't separate them. "It doesn't scare me," he said quietly. "Or it does, but not enough to make me run again. I have feelings for you too, Victoria. I have for weeks. I just didn't think I had the right to them." "Why wouldn't you have the right?" Victoria asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Because you're Victoria Hartwell," Marcus said. "Because you live in a house that looks like a museum and I live in a 3rd-floor walk-up. Because you run a billion-dollar company and I manage shipping containers. Because your ex-husband is right, I'm out of my depth." "Those are his words, not mine," Victoria said, her voice fierce now. "And they're bullshit. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a man who dropped everything to rush to his son when he was scared. I see a father who shows up every week to help a child who isn't his, asking nothing in return. I see someone who makes me laugh and makes me think and makes me feel like maybe I'm allowed to want more than just survival. That's not out of depth, Marcus. That's exactly what I need." The words hit him like a wave, washing away months of self-doubt and fear. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "Saturday at 2, he confirmed. "Danny and I will be there. And Victoria, I'm not running anymore. From anything." "Good," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Because we have a little girl to help heal and an ex-husband to put in his place. I suspect we're going to need each other for both." Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt like the universe offering encouragement. Marcus stood at Victoria's front door with Danny beside him, and this time when he rang the bell, he wasn't running a mental calculation of escape routes. He was here to stay. Helen opened the door, and her face broke into a genuine smile. "Welcome back," she said simply, stepping aside. "Sophia's been watching the driveway for an hour." The little girl appeared in the hallway almost immediately, clutching the plastic stegosaurus Danny had given her weeks ago. When she saw Danny, something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but a lightening, a coming back to herself that was visible and profound. Danny didn't wait for permission. He walked straight to Sophia and held out his hand. "I missed you," he said. "Want to play dinosaurs?" Sophia nodded, and then she did something that made everyone freeze. She reached out and took Danny's hand. It was such a simple gesture, but after weeks of regression, of refusing touch and connection, it was monumental. Victoria appeared from the kitchen, and when her eyes met Marcus's, The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. They stood there for a long moment, a conversation happening in silence. "I'm here. I see you. I'm not leaving. I believe in us." All of it communicated without a single word. The afternoon unfolded with the comfortable rhythm they'd established before Julian's interruption, but something was different now. Better. Marcus and Victoria were no longer pretending they were just two parents facilitating playtime. They sat closer. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining while the children played. When Victoria leaned against him, Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Sophia noticed. Children always notice the important things. She looked at her mother and Marcus sitting together, looked at the way Victoria's face had softened into something peaceful, and then she picked up a crayon. For 20 minutes, she drew with intense concentration while Danny built a Lego castle beside her. When she finished, she brought the paper to Victoria, pressing it into her mother's hands like an offering. The drawing was simple but clear. 4 stick figures, just like Danny's picture. 2 adults holding hands. 2 children holding hands. Above it, in wobbly letters that Sophia must have copied from books because she hadn't written in months, was a single word: family. Victoria's hands trembled as she held the paper. Sophia hadn't just drawn a picture. She'd communicated, intentionally, clearly, sharing her understanding of what was forming between the 4 of them. Marcus felt his chest tighten with emotion as Victoria pulled her daughter into her arms, kissing the top of her head with tears streaming down her face. "That's right, baby," Victoria whispered. "That's exactly right." And then, so softly Marcus almost missed it, Sophia spoke. Her voice was rusty from disuse, barely more than a whisper, but it was there, real and unmistakable. "Family," she said, the word shaky but clear. "We're family." The room erupted. Danny cheered like his favorite team had scored. Helen appeared in the doorway and started crying. Marcus found himself laughing and wiping his eyes simultaneously, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Victoria was sobbing, but they were tears of joy so pure they seemed to light the entire room. Sophia looked startled by her own voice, her eyes wide with surprise. But then Danny grabbed her hand and said, "You talk. You have the best voice ever." And just like that, the moment became normal. Not a miracle to be dissected and analyzed, but simply a little girl finding her way back to speech with people who loved her enough to wait. Over the following weeks, the progress continued. Sophia didn't suddenly become a chatterbox. She spoke in short sentences, mostly to Danny and Victoria and Marcus, but she was communicating, engaging, coming back to life. The specialists Victoria had kept on retainer were amazed, asking what treatment protocol had finally worked. Victoria just smiled and said she'd found the right support system. Julian's custody suit collapsed spectacularly. His lawyers tried to paint Marcus as an inappropriate influence, but the testimony from Sophia's medical team destroyed that argument. They documented how the child had begun healing only after Marcus's involvement, how her father's sudden reappearance had caused severe regression, how Marcus represented stability and safety in her life. The judge, a woman who'd seen enough parental manipulation to last a lifetime, granted Victoria full custody, with Julian getting supervised visits only if Sophia explicitly agreed to them. Julian left the courthouse looking like he'd been punched. He'd wanted control, wanted to swoop in and play hero, wanted to prove he was still relevant in his daughter's life. What he got was a legal document confirming he'd lost her through his own choices. Marcus, watching from the gallery, felt no triumph, just sadness for what Julian had thrown away through selfishness and pride. That evening, Victoria invited Marcus and Danny over for what she called a celebration dinner, but when they arrived, Helen was conveniently absent, and the table was set for 4 with candles and flowers that felt distinctly romantic. The kids ate quickly, eager to return to their play, leaving the adults alone in the dining room that overlooked the city lights. "Marcus Chun," Victoria said, setting down her wine glass with the kind of deliberate purpose that meant something important was coming. "I need to ask you something." Marcus's heart rate picked up, but he kept his voice steady. "Okay, these past months, everything we've built, it started with a mistake, with you sitting at the wrong table." She reached across and took his hand. "But it's become the most right thing in my life. You've helped my daughter find her voice. You've helped me find mine. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you." The words hung in the air, beautiful and terrifying. Marcus thought about all the reasons this shouldn't work, the different worlds they came from, the complications, the scrutiny they'd face. But then he thought about Sophia's drawing about family, about how sometimes the best things in life started with disasters that became doorways. "I love you too," he said, the words feeling both momentous and simple. "I think I have since the second week, maybe since that first disastrous dinner. You make me believe in second chances." Victoria smiled, and it transformed her entire face into something radiant. "So what do we do about it?" "Date like normal people," Marcus suggested. "Let the kids keep playing while we figure out if we can build something permanent. Take it slow, be smart about it, protect what we've created." Victoria laughed. "That sounds remarkably sensible for 2 people who met because a hostess convinced you to sit at the wrong table." Marcus grinned. "Sometimes the wrong table turns out to be exactly where you were supposed to be." 6 months later, Marcus stood in that same dining room, but everything had changed. Danny's toys were mixed with Sophia's in the playroom. Marcus's clothes hung in the closet next to Victoria's. The house that had felt like a museum had become a home, filled with laughter and chaos and love. He'd moved in slowly, cautiously, making sure the kids were comfortable with each change, but it had felt inevitable from the beginning, this merging of their lives. Danny called Victoria by her first name but treated her with the reverence of someone special. Sophia called Marcus by his name too, but sometimes in quiet moments she'd slip and call him something that made his heart stop. Daddy. She'd correct herself immediately, apologizing, but Marcus would just smile and tell her it was okay. That family came in all forms, and he'd be honored to be whatever she needed him to be. Victoria's board had been skeptical at first when news of her relationship went public, but Marcus had weathered their scrutiny with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything, and eventually they'd seen what Victoria saw, a man of integrity who made their CEO happy and helped her daughter thrive. That was worth more than any pedigree or bank account. On a Saturday evening in early fall, the four of them sat in the backyard Victoria had converted into a real play space, with a garden and a swing set and room for dinosaurs to roam. Sophia was talking more now, full sentences, stories, questions. She still had quiet days when words felt too hard, but they were becoming rarer. Daddy, she said, and this time she didn't correct herself. She was looking at Marcus with complete trust. Can you push me on the swing? Marcus felt Victoria's hand squeeze his, felt the weight of this chosen family they'd built from impossible circumstances. Of course, sweetheart, he said, standing. How high do you want to go? To the clouds, Sophia declared, and Danny immediately chimed in that he wanted to go higher, to the stars. Marcus pushed both children on the swings, their laughter rising into the evening air, while Victoria watched with an expression of pure contentment. That night in the restaurant, sitting at the wrong table, Marcus had thought his life was spiraling into disaster. He'd been terrified, out of place, convinced he'd made a terrible mistake. He could never have imagined that the wrong table would lead him here, to love, to family, to a home that fit him better than any place he'd ever lived. Victoria wheeled over to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. About wrong tables, Marcus said, pulling her close, and how sometimes the biggest disasters turn into the greatest gifts. She leaned her head against him. I wouldn't change a single thing. Not the confusion, not the fear, not even Julian's interference. It all led us here, and here was everything. Here was two children who'd found friendship and healing in each other. Here was two adults who'd found love when they'd stopped looking for it. Here was a family built not from biology or obligation, but from choice and commitment, and the simple decision to show up for each other day after day. Marcus looked at the house behind them, lights glowing warm against the darkening sky. He thought about his small apartment, about the life he'd been living before that fateful night. It had been safe, predictable, small enough that loss couldn't devastate him again. But this messy, complicated, beautiful life was worth every risk, worth sitting at the wrong table, worth staying when every instinct said to run, worth believing that broken people could heal each other, and that family was something you built, not something you were just born into. It's a wrap on our story, and what a journey it's been. But you know what? The conversation doesn't have to end here.